You think you know England, the country that gave the world Shakespeare, the Beatles, fish and chips, and a monarchy that somehow still exists in the 21st century. But England has a shadow side, one that most people never hear about. We're talking about poisoners who fooled Victorian London for years. A serial killer with a body count higher than Jack the Ripper. A royal scandal so explosive it nearly destroyed the crown. And a disaster so catastrophic it killed more people in one night than the entire London Blitz combined. These are the stories that England's tourist brochures don't mention. Let's get into it. The first story takes us to 1850s London, a city of fog, coal smoke, and a medical profession that still believed illness was caused by bad air. A man named William Palmer was making a very comfortable living as a country doctor in Rugeley, Staffordshire, a small town about 130 miles north of London. He had a medical practice, a large house, a wife, and a gambling habit that was quietly eating him alive. Palmer bet on horses, not occasionally the way a normal person might put a few shillings on a race, obsessively, ruinously. By the early 1850s, he owed money to half of Staffordshire and had started borrowing against insurance policies, some of them taken out on people who had a tendency to die shortly after the ink dried. His wife Annie died in 1854. She had recently been insured for £13,000, roughly £1.7 million in today's money. The cause of death was listed as cholera. His brother Walter died in 1855, also insured. Then his mother-in-law came to visit, fell ill, and died. Then 4 of his children died in infancy. None of this raised serious alarm because people died all the time in Victorian England. Infant mortality was brutal. Cholera was real. A doctor signing death certificates was simply doing his job. What finally caught up with Palmer was a man named John Parsons Cook, a friend, a fellow racing man, someone who trusted him completely. Cook won a significant amount at the Shrewsbury races in November 1855. Palmer was there with him. 2 weeks later, Cook was dead. The post-mortem was messy. The contents of Cook's stomach went missing. Palmer was seen meddling with the jars. When a second examination was conducted, traces of strychnine were found. Palmer was arrested. His previous victims were exhumed. The trial at the Old Bailey in 1856 drew crowds that hadn't been seen since public executions. Newspapers printed every detail. The jury took less than an hour. He was hanged in front of Stafford Prison on June 14th, 1856, in front of a crowd estimated at 30,000 people. The town of Rugeley was so embarrassed by the association that they petitioned to have their name changed. They were told they could as long as they named the town after the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister at the time was Lord Palmerston. They kept Rugeley. The second story is one most people outside England have never heard, and even many English people couldn't tell you the details. On December 5th, 1952, London went quiet under a peculiar yellow fog. Londoners were used to fog. They called it a pea souper, and it was as much a part of the city's identity as the Thames or the double-decker bus. This one felt different, thicker, and it wasn't just water vapor. The cause was a collision of circumstances. A cold snap had prompted Londoners to burn more coal than usual. An anticyclone, a high-pressure weather system, had settled over the city, trapping air close to the ground. The coal smoke from 4 million fireplaces, combined with emissions from power stations and factories, had nowhere to go. It just sat there, growing denser, mixing with the damp December air into something that was no longer really fog at all. It was sulfurous acid. Visibility dropped to a few feet. Buses stopped running because drivers couldn't see the road. Ambulances stopped responding to calls because paramedics couldn't find the addresses. People got lost walking home from the corner shop. At Sadler's Wells Theater, a performance of La Traviata was abandoned mid-act because the audience couldn't see the stage. The fog had seeped inside. And people started dying. The official death toll published at the time said 4,000. It was a lie. Not deliberate exactly, but a number the government found convenient. Later analysis, conducted decades afterward, when the records were properly examined, put the real figure at 12,000 dead in 5 days, possibly higher. They died of bronchitis, pneumonia, hypoxia. The most vulnerable went first. The elderly, the very young, people with existing lung conditions, but healthy adults died too. The hospitals were overwhelmed. Mortuaries ran out of coffins. Florists sold out of flowers for funerals and didn't restock for weeks. The government's first instinct was to minimize. The Minister of Health told Parliament it wasn't as serious as it looked. It took 4 years and sustained public pressure to produce the Clean Air Act of 1956, which restricted coal burning in urban areas and began slowly to make London breathable again. The Great Smog of 1952 killed more Londoners in 5 days than the Blitz killed in any single month of World War II. It is one of the worst environmental disasters in British history, and most people have never heard of it. The third story involves a woman named Mary Ann Cotton, and she deserves to be as famous as Jack the Ripper, probably more. Mary Ann Cotton was born in County Durham in 1832. She worked as a dressmaker, married young, had children, and buried them. Over the course of roughly 2 decades, from the mid-1850s to the early 1870s, somewhere between 15 and 21 people in her immediate circle died. 3 husbands, a lover, her own mother, 11 of her children, including stepchildren, lodgers, friends. The cause of death in almost every case was listed as gastric fever. This was a catch-all Victorian diagnosis that covered a multitude of sins. The symptoms, vomiting, diarrhea, cramping, rapid decline, matched what arsenic poisoning looked like, but Victorian doctors rarely tested for it, and there was little incentive to look too hard. Cotton moved frequently, which helped. Each death was investigated locally, if at all, by a different doctor in a different town who had no way of knowing about the pattern. She also collected on insurance policies. Not always, but often enough. What caught her was a 7-year-old boy named Charles Edward Cotton, her stepson. She'd been trying to get rid of him, had approached the local parish officer to take him into care, had made remarks to neighbors about not expecting him to be around much longer. He died in July 1872. The parish officer, Thomas Riley, was suspicious enough to alert a doctor, who was suspicious enough to conduct a proper examination. Arsenic, significant amounts, in the stomach wall. She was arrested. The bodies of previous victims were exhumed. More arsenic, more arsenic, more arsenic. The trial at Durham Assizes in March 1873 lasted 3 days. She maintained her innocence throughout, calmly, almost serenely, in a way that unnerved observers. She was convicted. Mary Ann Cotton was hanged on March 24th, 1873, at Durham Prison. The executioner botched the drop. She strangled slowly for 3 minutes. There was no national sensation, not really. No newspaper frenzy of the kind that would later surround Jack the Ripper. She was a woman from the North, a working-class poisoner, and the Victorians had a limited appetite for that kind of story. Her name faded. The children's rhyme remained, sung for decades in the streets of Durham. Mary Ann Cotton, she's dead and she's rotten. The fourth story is about a ship and about the gap between what England told the world and what it actually did. The SS Daphne was launched on July 3rd, 1883, at a shipyard on the River Clyde in Scotland. Technically Scotland, but the ship was headed for an English shipping company, and the story belongs to the industrial age that England built. On her launch day, as the Daphne slid into the water, she immediately capsized. The reason was straightforward and catastrophic. She was too heavy. 250 workers were aboard for the launch, a common practice at the time, since workers would begin fitting out the interior once she was in the water. She was also carrying machinery, tools, materials. Nobody had checked whether the weight distribution was safe for a ship that hadn't yet been ballasted. Oh, the Daphne rolled. Within 90 seconds, she was on her side. Within minutes, she was mostly submerged. Of the 250 workers aboard, 124 drowned, many of them trapped below decks, unable to reach hatches that were now underwater. Many couldn't swim. The inquiry found negligence. The owners were criticized. And then, in the way of these things, the inquiry concluded the fine was paid, and the industry moved on. The ship was raised, repaired, renamed the Rose, and eventually sailed under the name Daphne II. The families of the dead received small compensation payments. There was no meaningful change in safety regulation as a direct result. Industrial England moved at the speed of profit, and 124 dead workers was, in the accounting of the time, an acceptable loss. The fifth story begins with a thunderstorm over Hampshire on August 2nd, 1944. Neville Heath was 27 years old, handsome in a specific English way, square-jawed, well-spoken, the kind of man who looked like he belonged in an officer's uniform. He did own uniforms. He just had no right to be wearing them. He'd been court-martialed 3 times from 3 different branches of the military for fraud, impersonation, and going absent without leave. He had also served time for theft. None of this was visible in his manner. In June 1946, in a London hotel room, Heath murdered a woman named Marjorie Gardner. What he did to her was so severe that police initially struggled to determine the exact cause of death. He fled to Bournemouth, checked into a hotel under a false name, using the identity of a real RAF officer, and within weeks had picked up another woman, Doreen Marshall, taken her for dinner, and murdered her too. Her body was found in a ravine covered with branches. Heath was caught because he was brazen. He walked into the Bournemouth police station to offer his assistance with the investigation into Doreen Marshall's disappearance. He used a false name but was recognized. In his hotel room, police found the murder weapon, a riding crop with a distinctive diamond weave pattern, along with a blood-stained scarf and other items belonging to Marjorie Gardner. His defense argued insanity. The jury rejected it in under an hour. Heath was hanged at Pentonville Prison in October 1946. Before his execution, he was offered a customary last drink. He asked for whiskey. Then, apparently reconsidering, he said, "Make it a double." Whether or not the line is apocryphal, and there are those who doubt it, it has stuck because it fits perfectly the image that emerged at trial. A man without remorse, performing composure all the way to the end. England is a country that is very good at presenting a certain face to the world. Orderly, restrained, possessed of an almost genetic attachment to fair play and cueing and the ritual understatement of terrible things. But underneath that surface runs a different history, messier, darker, and considerably more interesting than the postcard version. Poisoners who killed dozens before anyone thought to look. Disasters so vast the government spent years pretending they hadn't happened. Killers who charmed their way through drawing rooms and hotel lobbies and left wreckage in rooms that the newspapers could barely bring themselves to describe. These stories aren't aberrations. They're the other side of the ledger. The part that doesn't make it onto the heritage trails or into the school curriculum. And they matter because history that only tells you about the winners and the monuments isn't really history at all. If you want more of this, the hidden histories, the disasters, the people who slipped through the cracks of official memory, subscribe. We put out a new video every week. And if there's a specific case, a specific country, a specific era you want us to go after, leave it in the comments. We read all of them. See you next time.